The role of the Vatican and the Pope during the Second World War is a matter of some contention. Critics say that Pope Pius XII did not do enough to either condemn the Holocaust or aid its victims. Supporters say that he did, and his actions saved hundreds of thousands of lives. It is somewhat complex, but it is interesting, and it is what we will unravel in this mini-series.
Et Spiritus Sanctus.
I'm Astrid Deinhard.
And I'm Indy Neidell.
There he is.
Here I am.
Welcome to a mini-series on the Vatican in World War II, along with our guest Timothy Peach, who you will see soon, and I will be looking at all the espionage and the intrigue that the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church got up to, and Spartacus will be looking at Catholics as enablers, resistors, and victims of the Holocaust. But first, it's important to set a scene with the geopolitical position of the Holy See and the Vatican before the outbreak of the war. And for that, I thought I'd call on my good friend Indy Neidell. Indy,
Yeah.
let's talk about the first pope to shepherd the Catholic Church in the age of fascism, Pius XI.
Sure. But I'd first like to say to those of you who pronounce his name Pius out there that Pius is the Latin pronunciation, so that's what we're rolling with. Pius is elevated to the papacy in February 1922, just a few months before Benito Mussolini marches on Rome and becomes fascist dictator of Italy in October. The new pope does not intend to shy away from geopolitical upheavals, though. In fact, in his first papal encyclical, essentially a statement on church doctrine, he calls on Catholics to take an active role in ensuring world peace. He also makes no secret of his feelings for the more mainstream ideas about international cooperation.
No merely human institution of today can be successful in devising a set of international laws which will be in harmony with world conditions as the Middle Ages were in the possession of that true League of Nations, Christianity.
See, the Vatican has been excluded from the international order for a while at this point. Before 1870, the Pope held sovereign rule over Rome and the Papal States in central Italy. But this ended with the unification of Italy as a kingdom.
Ever since, the papacy has considered itself a prisoner in the Vatican. The Holy See lacks statehood, and so it was excluded from historic moments like the 1990 Peace Conference, which maybe explains a bit of what Pius has against the League of Nations.
He does keep a keen eye on their practical affairs, though, and continues the work of trying to cultivate world peace.
And he also pursues Concordats with many of countries created by the post-war treaties, together with his Cardinal Secretary of State, Pietro Caspari.
Concordats are agreements that define the relationship between the Holy See and a sovereign state, similar to establishing diplomatic relations. Although many countries have major Catholic parties, Pius, Caspari, and company preferred dealing with state governments directly rather than through intermediaries.
Okay, the results are mixed. They managed to get Concordats signed with Latvia in 1922, Poland in 1925, and Romania and Lithuania in 27, right?
Right.
However, relations with them can still be quite strained, especially as countries like Poland and Lithuania are often at odds with each other.
There is also a Concordat signed with Bavaria in 1924 and some other majority Catholic German states, which isn't especially impressive.
But the one signed with Prussia in 29 is impressive because it's a majority Protestant state and dominated by socialist government. The negotiations for all this are led by Monsignore Eugenio Pacelli. Basically, the Vatican's ambassador to Germany.
Sure.
He will be important later on,
He
as
will
we
be-
know,
will
very
be
important.
Very important
Yeah.
later on. The Kingdom of Yugoslavia is a notable failure in the Concordat policy. The Croats and Slovenes in the kingdom are primarily Catholic, and the Holy See does come pretty close to securing their religious rights. But anti-Catholic feeling in the Serbian Orthodox Church and the Serb-dominated government means this never comes to fruition. Pius also pursues good relations with the great powers.
America is growing more isolated, but Pius thinks Britain can still mediate for peace in the world. He gives a grand welcome to George V when he visits in 23, which is pretty nice of him considering Britain is a Protestant country that has a history of discriminatory laws against Catholics, not that far back in past, right?
Well, he is the Pope, right? Forgive as the Lord forgave you and all that.
Yeah,
Pope.
There you go.
There I go.
True. But Britain is a pretty tricky one because there are a whole bunch of Catholic both in the country itself and its vast imperial territories, which often cause Protestant British authorities a headache.
Yeah, and threading the needle between them is a difficult task for Pius. For example, Britain tries to block an audience between the Pope and the president of the recently independent and majority Catholic Irish Free State. Relations also almost break down entirely in 1930 when a conflict erupts between the Catholic Church in Malta and the British authorities there. Still, overall, Pius does maintain relatively strong diplomatic ties with the British, and in 1938, an apostolic delegate will be posted to London to foster open channels of communication.
France is another key diplomatic friend of Pius, although the Franco-Belgian invasion and occupation of the Ruhr in 23 is a serious blip.
Fearing war and the spread of communism, Pius tries hard to mediate between the two sides. His continual calls for Christian peace do influence the strongly Catholic France to at least be more cautious. Still, it leads to a lot of French suspicion and resentment of the Vatican for its seemingly pro-German stance. This gives credence to the anti-clerical rhetoric of a radical left government in 1924 and 1925. But once that falls, Vatican-French relations are pretty much on track again.
But the high point throughout all this diplomacy is the 1929 Lateran Treaty between the Holy See and Fascist Italy. Right?
You are correct, yes. And what that does is that affirms papal recognition of the state of Italy with its capital in Rome, and in return, Italy recognizes Vatican City as an independent state under the sovereignty of the Holy See. The Pope now, once again, then, has sovereign territory, a whole half of a square kilometer of sovereign territory.
The treaty also has the fascist government recognizing Catholicism as the country's religion and paying some 1,750 million lire, how much is that? In reparations for the territories the Holy See had lost. Italian priests also must swear allegiance to the regime in Rome, and the government can veto the appointment of an Italian bishop. The good times don't last that long, though. Right.
Indeed, they do not. In an increasing atmosphere of dislike and distrust, both sides try to use each other to further their own aims. The main contention between Pius and Mussolini is who will guide Italy's youth. Pius thinks it should be the church, with its associate lay organization Catholic Action, raising the next generation of leaders. Mussolini obviously thinks that it should be the fascist party.
The climax comes on May 30th in 31, when Mussolini bans the youth organization of Catholic Action. In response, Pius publishes the encyclical We Do Not Need in June.
We find ourselves confronted by a mass of authentic affirmations and no less authentic facts, which reveal beyond the slightest possibility of doubt the resolve to monopolize completely the young, from their tenderest years up to manhood and womanhood, for the exclusive advantage of a party and a regime based on an ideology which clearly resolves itself into a real pagan worship of the state.
And this isn't a complete denunciation of Mussolini's Italy. Still, it is clear that the church will not accept any check on its spiritual power. The two sides reach a compromise some months later where Italy affirms the legal recognition of organizations run by Catholic action with the firm reminder that they are purely religious.
Yeah.
But what of Pius's foreign policy now the 1930s have rolled around what?
Well, he has removed Gaspari as Cardinal Secretary of State. He has replaced him with our friend Eugenio Pacelli, now a cardinal.
And together, they weather the countless crises sweeping the world. First is the Great Depression, which provides the background to another famous encyclical, In the 40th Year.
It was probably going to be published anyway because it is meant to mark the 40th anniversary of a famous encyclical on Catholic social teaching by Leo XIII. But the recent economic woes brought on by industrialization gives it new power as it rages against both unrestrained capitalism, socialism, and communism. These positions are nothing new. The Catholic Church has long preached against these secular ideologies, calling on people to instead remember that humanity can be saved through Christ.
But they do come at a poignant time, especially because the Holy See is gearing up to sign its next big Concordat, one with the German Reich.
As a few of the history buffs among you may know, the Nazi Party is on the rise in the early 1930s. The position of the Holy See towards them is pretty mixed. On the one hand, Pacelli once describes National Socialism as perhaps the most dangerous heresy of our time. On the other hand, the Nazis' obsession with the evils of communism broadly tracks with the Catholic Church's own position. For their part, the Nazi Party is hostile towards all forms of the Christian religion. Still, they are also opportunists and seem to have a grudging respect for the awesome global power of the Catholic Church.
But in 1931, Hermann Göring even petitions Pacelli to lift a ban on Catholics joining the Nazi Party. At first, he is ignored, but calls for it from Germany's Catholic conservatives grow louder and louder, as it may mean a bulwark against communism. Not long after Hitler seizes power in 1933, as we all know, the German bishops go ahead and lift the ban themselves.
And it soon becomes evident that some form of diplomatic arrangement would benefit both parties. For the newly installed Nazi-led government, a Concordat would confer on them some legitimacy. For the Catholic Church, the already obviously brutal nature of the Nazi regime means it's probably a good idea to get their position and their people in Germany some kind of security.
Yeah. Negotiations go pretty quick, and by July 20th, Franz von Papen and Eugenio Pacelli signed the Reichskonkordat.
The provisions are fairly standard. Among other things, it safeguards religious education in schools, allows for specifically Catholic schools, and provides for chaplains in the Reichswehr. But in just a matter of days, the Nazis begin going back on their word, dissolving the German Catholic Youth League and starting to even imprison clergy, often on made-up immorality charges.
But the Nazis aren't the only ones doing it. Once the Spanish Civil War starts a few years later, left-wing Spanish Republicans unleash a wave of terror against the Catholic Church inside the country, killing thousands of priests and monks. But even when the strongly Catholic Spanish nationalists under Francisco Franco start getting the upper hand, Pius isn't so pleased. Not only is Franco a hugely divisive figure among Catholics, but his success is thanks to the intervention of Italy and Germany, two states who are by then shaping up to be big enemies of Vatican City.
Like the rest of the world, Pius has witnessed Europe descend into totalitarianism and violence. Concordats, like treaties between nations, apparently do little to safeguard international relations.
So he takes drastic steps. In March 1937, he publishes 3 encyclicals condemning the persecution of Catholics and the ideologies behind them. The most famous is Mit brennender Sorge, with burning anxiety, written in German so that it speaks directly to the German Catholics. It thunders against how the Nazis have broken the terms of the Reichskonkordat. But More significantly, he condemns the ideology of the Nazi Party itself.
None but superficial minds could stumble into concepts of a national god, of a national religion, or attempt to lock within the frontiers of a single people, within the narrow limits of a single race, God, the creator of the universe, king and legislator of all nations, before whose immensity they are as a drop in a bucket.
This explosive encyclical is smuggled into Germany and read from nearly every pulpit on Palm Sunday. It sends shockwaves throughout the Catholic world as people become alerted to the persecution of their German brothers.
Pius does not stop there. Next, he publishes Divini Redemptoris, the promise of a divine redeemer. This is a full-blown attack on communism in much of the language you would expect, condemning it for its atheism, its subversion of natural order, but it also takes it apart from its roots, refuting its origins in Hegelian philosophy.
The final one isn't so relevant to the history we're telling here, as it is focused on anti-Catholic persecution in Mexico.
An important piece of history, but not one we have time to talk about today.
Pius continues to rail against the forces of Nazism, fascism, and communism.
He makes no secret of his feelings for the anti-Semitism that fascist Italy is now starting to practice. In a speech to Belgian pilgrims in 1938, he declares, "I say to you, it is impossible for a Christian to take part in anti-Semitism. It is inadmissible. Through Christ and in Christ, we are the spiritual progeny of Abraham. Spiritually, we are all Semites."
He also intervenes in the Munich Conference of September 1938, when Hitler threatens to go to war with Czechoslovakia over the Sudetenland. He delivers an emotional radio broadcast where he even offers his own life up to God in return for world peace. He is then both shocked and angered when Britain and France's action is appeasing Hitler.
But Pius's health is deserting him. He is now 81 and suffering from diabetes and cardiac problems. Still, he works preparing a speech for a coming assembly of Italian bishops for February 12th, 1939. His prepared text reads almost like a last testament, but he also finds space to criticize the Italian state once again, condemning the recent racial laws it has passed. He also urges his bishops to pray for
the return to the faith of all peoples, all nations, all races, united and conjoined in the link of the common blood of the great human family. Prophecy, order, tranquility, peace, peace, peace to the whole world, even though it seems to have been taken hold of by a homicidal and suicidal folly of armaments.
Pius never actually gives that speech. He dies on February 10th. His career in retrospect matched that of so many statesmen in the interwar years, the pursuit of diplomacy in the 1920s, and ultimately futile calls for peace in the 1930s.
That will be his legacy. His successor will forge one of his own when the world goes to war in a matter of months.
The Vatican will now be drawn into a conflict it is unprepared to fight, with divisions within itself and no means of defense. It will mean both the salvation and the death of hundreds of thousands of people. And for that, we will have Spartacus take you through the next chapter in this history of the Catholic Church, the Vatican, and the war against humanity.
The mission we here at TimeGhost are following by spreading more knowledge about our ancestors' failures and successes is also to enable a better future.
It is the TimeGhost Army that allows us to do that. So join the TimeGhost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com so we can do more content like this fantastic miniseries. She'll see you next time.
Darlings.